Welcome to the Catholic Culture Podcast. I'm Thomas V. Miras. This show is a production of CatholicCulture.org and, more importantly, an offering to the Holy Family. Hello, everyone. I wanted to open this episode by expressing my sorrow and solidarity for those who are unable to attend Mass or go to church at this time because of the coronavirus. I'm somewhat in that position myself because the Archdiocese of New York has just shut down all Masses and sacraments, services of any kind, although the churches are still open for private prayer, thankfully. I'm really thankful that I found a Byzantine Catholic church to attend Mass at. They don't have it every day, but still, it's a great thing. I attended Sunday Mass there this evening, the Divine Liturgy, I suppose it's properly called there, and it was really beautiful. So it's just important for all of us to remember that God provides the graces that we need, no matter the situation. So definitely follow the advice of so many great priests who have been telling us to make spiritual communions, say the daily rosary. Great time to commit to doing that for the rest of your life if you haven't yet. And there's so many different things we can do. And of course, praying with the bishops to Our Lady of Guadalupe for an end to this crisis. And of course, you're all in my prayers for sure. And needless to say, I hope everybody is physically healthy as well. But my primary concern right now, I think we can pretty much all agree, is the temporary cessation of the availability of the sacraments. But, God's grace abounds, and this could be the greatest Lent, we've ever had, in our lives. We should be inspired to come back to the sacraments with renewed love and gratitude, and to take more advantage of the graces that come from them once we've had the experience of having to do without them. That said, on to today's episode. As you can see, the episode today doesn't have a episode number on it, and that's because it's not a normal Catholic Culture Podcast episode. I've been going back and listening to the archive, the early episodes of the show, for the first time in quite a while, and I'm happy to say that even though I obviously have developed and improved a lot, both in my production abilities and in my skills as a host and interviewer, in terms of the actual content and the information contained, a lot of the early episodes I think are of lasting interest. So I thought it might be fun to go back and select some highlights from the earlier episodes of the podcast, and this episode today is kind of a first installment of an ongoing series of Catholic Culture Podcast highlight selections. Now, of course, I'm going to keep putting out plenty of new content at more or less the same rate as before, so don't worry, I'm not going to just flood you with clip shows week after week. I won't necessarily feature every single episode. I'll probably do most of them. This is just a way of featuring some of my past guests and topics that I think are still interesting, and to make, especially for those who may have come to the show more recently and haven't heard those episodes before. The excerpts will be of varying lengths, just depending on how much I feel like putting in here. An excerpt from one episode might be 3 minutes, another one might be 15 minutes. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it, and it's nice to be able to throw that in there every once in a while, and I've really enjoyed going back and listening to a lot of these. Now, before I go any further, I want to remind you of two things. First, CatholicCulture.org and all of our podcasts are run almost entirely on the donations of our users. So if you value the material we produce, please consider giving us some help. You can go to CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio if you wish to contribute specifically to the podcast fund. And secondly, if you're holed up at home because of the virus, first of all, you want to take the opportunity for recollection and for spending time with your families, and for going into Lent more deeply. But secondly, and I hope this is, actually a supplement to going into Lent more deeply. We do have 2 other podcasts, so if you're looking for something to replace perhaps the homily at the daily Mass you can no longer attend, you might check out, for example, our other show, Catholic Culture Audiobooks, where we have a lot of sermons by the Church Fathers and John Henry Newman, and we've got a lot of great material coming out for the rest of Lent. We'll be finishing St. Athanasius' work on the life of St. Anthony. We've got a bunch of great sermons by Newman, some of the catechetical lectures originally given in Lent a couple of millennia ago by St. Cyril of Jerusalem. So a lot of great stuff. And then, of course, there's Way of the Fathers with Mike Aquilina. That's our other show. So those are both well worth checking out. And I hope that if you have some spare time, you might be able to put those into the rotation if you haven't gotten a chance to do so before. Today's first installment in my series of highlights compilations from the Catholic Culture Podcast will be featuring excerpts from episodes 1 through 5 and episode 9. The first episode came out on May 1st, 2018, the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, and obviously I want my work to be dedicated to Mary always and to Jesus through Mary, but because May 1st, this Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, was a good day to launch, I decided why not dedicate it to the Holy Family as a whole. So that's the origin of the dedication, which you hear at the beginning of every single episode of this podcast, that it's an offering to the Holy Family. And I'm very grateful to be able to make this offering more or less every week. My first guest was really wonderful to talk to. It was quite a long interview, but a wonderful conversation with a very warm-hearted, wonderful Catholic man. I believe he was 87 at the time we talked, and this was the actor Tony Makis Sr. From Chicago. Mostly an actor of the stage, but has worked on stage and screen with legends like Henry Fonda and Elizabeth Montgomery and Robert De Niro and so many others. So I'll play a couple of clips from this episode. In the first one, he's talking about the role of the Holy Spirit in the actor's performance, and in particular, so this is from episode 1, A Working Actor's Working Faith with Tony Makis Sr., and the links to all of these episodes I'm sampling from will be on the show notes page for today's episode at catholicculture.org.
I did a show. Really, it's more of the Holy Ghost that I rely upon for clarity. And I'm thinking of a play called The Gigli Concert. And Gigli, what was a superior tenor. He was a contemporary of Caruso's, but his voice was extraordinary. He lived longer than Caruso and was able, therefore, to perform longer and in a special way. And a play was written about an Irish man who wanted to sing like Gigli. And there was a moment in the play, for me, the turning point was listening to Gigli sing for not the first time, but to sing an aria. There are 2 men on stage and the music, and I am driven to my knees, and my arms are raised. This is not done consciously. I don't know if you can follow this, but it is an inner dynamic that drove me to my knees, raised my arms, and I visualized myself at the moment listening, no dialogue, listening to Gigli sing and receiving the stigmata.
Was that written into the play, the stigmata, or was that?
No. That's the Holy Ghost. That's the Holy Ghost.
So that was what got you there.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Holy Ghost said, just follow me, will you? Don't interrupt me by your thought. Don't interrupt me by your feelings. Just do what I say. And, well, by God, yes. It moved me, obviously, and it moved the audience as well. They didn't know what was going on in my mind, nor could I project it, except that they could see that I was moved in a different way from saying it. I had no words to speak, but I had to project how this man is affected by something outside of him and one of the eternal verities, beauty. There are three, of course: goodness, truth, and beauty. This was an effect of beauty through a spiritual experience that I had with the Holy Ghost.
That's really amazing, and it's such a beautiful thing because people talk about beauty wounding us, being pierced by beauty. So that stigmata thing is very appropriate for your character's experience of beauty, and it's so perfect. And yet, it's true, you couldn't have thought of it. It had to be the Holy Ghost because it's such an unexpected connection to make.
Yes, it was to me too. I mean, it was a surprise. It was a surprise, and it happened every night. Every night that that moment occurred, I would experience this sensation. So much so that I would look at my hands. I mean, after the scene was over, look at my hands. I am certainly not worthy to receive anything like that from our Lord, but it was an experience, an indelible experience that I'll never forget.
Going back to the experience you had on stage, if I understand you correctly, you didn't get off stage at the end of the night and say, "That was great, I'm going to do that again the next night," but it happened again.
No,
correct?
No,
I think that's a really important thing.
Correct.
That struck me because in the theater, every performance is supposed to be different. In other words, you're not really supposed to plan every motion beforehand. Am I correct?
No, you're not correct. You're supposed to perform exactly as you rehearse, except for the fact that people are different every single night. Not only are you different because of the day's experiences, but you are different as the audience is different. They're seeing the same play, hearing the same words,
right?
Yet they're different. And they accept them in a different way. That way, the actor gets closer and deeper into the character that he's portraying. You get deeper and deeper and deeper into his being, and he takes over if you allow it to happen. You have control. This is a good one. I really have to think through. You have control, but you want to let go. You have to let go to completely understand and present this being to somebody who has never seen him or her before. How do you make this person whole and real to an audience that doesn't know who he is or why he has done what he is doing? You have to make them understand it, and it's different. It's different every night.
So it sounds like you are intending to do things as rehearsed, and yet you have to be vulnerable and allow things to come out in the moment. Is that basically it?
Absolutely. The painter is given a brush, paint, and a canvas. And in the process of creating his work of art, if he is inspired, as so many of our artists were, it comes out in a deeper and more spiritual way as he progresses through the travel from brush and paint to a reality on this canvas. So that when people centuries later, look at it and say, "Oh my goodness, oh, how in the world did he do that?" It's really something, isn't it? It's something to look at in awe. It really is awesome. And it is spiritual, and it is God-given.
Did you always know that it was the Holy Spirit?
No. For a long while, I thought it was me. Oh, what a great imagination I have. What a generous amount of creativity I was given. You were what? I was given. No. You were blessed with it. You weren't. It was given, but you had to take care of it. You had to be a caretaker. But you have to know where it comes from. And where does it come from? It comes from the Holy Ghost. It comes from a meeting of the Holy Trinity. They get together and say, what do we do with this guy? Can we give him a kick? Can we give him, jumpstart him? And I said, yeah, I think he's worthy of a kick. Let's give it to him good. Oh boy. And sometimes it is really too good. Oh my.
Now, if you've seen a film that Tony was in, chances are it's The Untouchables, which came out in 1987, directed by Brian De Palma, written by David Mamet. It stars Kevin Costner, Robert De Niro, and Sean Connery. And if you've seen the film, Tony plays the judge in the big courtroom scene towards the end of the film. So in the clip you're about to hear, Tony tells a very amusing story about Robert De Niro that happened during the filming of that courtroom scene.
We had a scene in the courtroom, which, by the way, was completely built.
Wow.
It was, I thought, a brilliant set. I was the presiding judge. To give you a picture of what it was like, the judge was up against a wall, and he had his chair from which he would listen and dictate his direction of the court proceedings. To the right was a bank of spectators. Most of them were reporters. And then moving away from them and into the courtroom proper, you had the beginnings of the people attending the trial and the separation between them and the immediate area in which the court proceedings are held, that is, with the prosecution and the defense. The defense was sitting there with De Niro being on trial for various acts of malfeasance.
Yeah, income tax, though.
That's
right. Officially income tax, right?
And across from them was the chairs for the prosecution. The jury was sitting at the extreme opposite of the court reporters, and not only them, but radio as well. And right opposite them was the jury, and then we get to the witness chair, and then the judge. So now you've got 360 degrees in this courtroom. At the beginning of the scene, the defense lawyer is talking about the honesty and purity of Robert De Niro, who was playing Al Capone.
Right.
And the camera begins shooting at the table at which Capone is sitting, takes in the audience immediately behind, takes in the jury, takes in the witness, takes in the judge, and then goes all the way over to the newspaper reporters, the camera people, and so on, and then back to the table at which De Niro Capone is seated with his group of lawyers. 360 degrees. One camera.
Yeah.
Covering all that area.
Yeah.
Difficult shot. It was done 37 times.
Wow.
Just that one shot. And it's a wonder. Now, this is where the art of film acting comes in, to make it look believable and as if it were happening for the first time. It was a tough one. And as far as I know, that shot was never used, but it was a cover for whatever editing might have taken place after the film was developed and in its editing process.
Okay.
So De Niro was completely protected as far as having footage to use if he got in trouble with any, segment of that particular scene.
I see.
So it was a wise move, but a trying one. And then he had a sequence where in the courtroom, Capone gets up and he runs up to his defense attorney and starts to hit him. Courtroom goes absolutely crazy. All the reporters come rushing over. They want to take pictures. They want to hear comments by Capone and whether he's guilty or not. And they're trying to pull him off of his attorney. So finally, that quiets down. And at the end of that sequence, De Palma calls a break. So we break, and I was going to head back to the dressing room to sit down and relax for 5-10 minutes, however long the break took place. And as I was going over to my dressing area, it was in the open, and De Niro's bodyguards, he had 2 of them. They were in conversation as they passed my room. They said, "All right, Bobby, we ain't gonna let this happen no more. That is it. Anytime anybody gets near them, it's curtains for them. Ain't that the truth? That's the truth. Okay, long as we're on the same page." The break is over. We go back. We repeat the scene. De Niro jumps up and he starts to cross over to his attorney. The camera people, the news people, all start to pull Capone off of his defense attorney when all of a sudden you hear, "Oh, punch, sock, oh, moan, groan." It's devastating. You don't know what's going on. And finally, the sergeant at arms gets it all calmed down. And what De Niro's bodyguards did was that they punched, socked anybody who got near Bobby. Anybody got that's what they called him. Anybody who got near Bobby, they were done with.
What were they thinking? I mean, it's part of a scene.
You bet. It was part of the scene, but there were so many.
Wow.
All they heard was sound and people, collapsing to the floor. Yeah. They were not gentle. Anyway, that was the memory I carry from the Untouchables.
The last clip I'll play from this episode is another funny anecdote. Tony is talking about a well-known playwright and screenwriter named David Mamet, who, if you're not familiar with who he is, he wrote The Untouchables, which you just heard Tony talking about. Also wrote the play and the film Glengarry Glen Ross, House of Games, Heist, The Verdict, a lot of other plays and films. But the relevant info for this story is that he used to be a socialist and has since become a conservative. But Tony knew him before he became a conservative.
David has come to realize. David has awakened. His spirit has awakened.
So I've heard, yeah.
Oh, my. Yeah, he has seen the light. Yep. I'm so glad to hear that, too.
Did you ever work with him?
He's a very loyal man. He is generous to the people he had worked with here in Chicago, Macy being one. Mm-hmm. I think he used Macy in almost everything he did. But Mamet, at the time I knew him, was very socialist.
Oh, so you knew him, but you didn't work with him?
Oh, I know him,
yeah, personally?
Sure.
Oh, great. Sure. So he was kind of a leftist at that time.
Oh, leftist, yes. Yeah, that's the word. And he would say, "Oh, here comes the conservative," meaning me. And yes, yeah. And I say, "Well, there goes the communist," meaning him.
Episode 2 of the show was something of an oral history of Operation Rescue, and probably any older listeners will know what that was. But for those who don't, it was a pro-life movement and organization that had its heyday at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s. They were best known for doing things like blockading abortion clinics, non-violently, but they were often falsely accused of violence Operation Rescue is actually the largest civil disobedience movement in U.S. history, with over 50,000 people having been arrested between 1988 and 1992. But even most Catholics don't know the story of it, and that's why I think this is an episode of lasting value. The bulk of it is an interview with Bill Cotter, who was the head of Operation Rescue in Boston, and he spent 19 months in prison for his involvement with the protests. And then the end of the episode is a shorter interview with CatholicCulture.org's Phil Lawler. Phil was very much involved with Operation Rescue in Boston. He was even the public face of it when Bill Cotter was in jail, and he wrote a book about the movement in 1992. So I'm just going to play a short clip of this episode, but the whole thing's worth listening to just to get a very important piece of American Catholic history, the history of the fight against abortion. In the clip I'm playing, Phil talks about the media bias against Operation Rescue and the slanders that even well-known politicians would level against it.
Well, I was asked to stand by during rescues and just talk to reporters. And the interesting thing is that most reporters didn't really want to talk to me. So it was a little bit of a sales job and not a very successful one. The thing that I found most striking there was when reporters did talk to me, they would ask me, if they were asking questions, they would say, what do you think we should notice? And I would always tell them, notice the character of the opposition. And they would say, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, I'm not telling you what to report. You report what you see about the opposition, about the people who are standing on the sidewalks beside us screaming obscenities and, some of them openly engaging in satanic rituals and so forth. It was a spectacular scene, which you would think would make great drama, great reporting, but nobody reported on it. So that was perhaps the most frustrating thing. I guess another frustrating thing was when I was asked to comment on someone on the pro-abortion side who had reported a death threat. And I said, well, I think that's a terrible thing, and I can sympathize because I've had death threats too. And the reporter showed no interest whatsoever in that. There was just an enormous double standard. And that continues to this day, by the way, because, to this day, we have arguments in Massachusetts about how the abortion clinics need protection because of all the violence that takes place outside them. Well, if you go to these clinics, you'll see that they're all rigged up with video machinery that it's taping everything that takes place on the sidewalk. So if there's any level of violence, why aren't we seeing any of the videotape?
So how was it that you were attacked in the media?
I don't know that I personally was attacked. I was attacked only insofar as I represented Operation Rescue, and there were fairly routine attacks that Operation Rescue was engaged in violence.
Right. Now, was this sort of insinuation, or were there more outright accusations of that?
There were vague accusations. The implication was clear, but it was fairly unusual that someone would come out and say Operation Rescue is violent. Right. I'll give you one spectacular case in point where that did happen. And that's where the late Senator Ted Kennedy, during a campaign fundraising event, said, and I quote, Operation Rescue has a policy of firebombing and even murder.
Wow. That is remarkable.
I was actually among several people who sued.
Wow.
Because that, accusing someone of murder is
a policy.
A policy.
Firebombing.
Yes.
Episode 3 was Native American Catholicism and the New Evangelization. This was an interview with a writer for the National Catholic Register and an old acquaintance of mine, Peter Jesserer Smith, who at the time had written several articles for the Register and elsewhere about forgotten aspects of Native American Catholic heritage, mainly to do with some very holy men and women who were converts of the Jesuit martyrs who are more well known and have been officially canonized, whereas some of these very holy Native men and women have not yet been canonized. But it's a beautiful, fascinating history. One of the other things that he talks about in the show is the fact that there are actually over 1,000 martyrdoms of Catholics in North America that people don't know about. Now, back in this episode, I had some sound issues with my side of the conversation where the sound quality was honestly fine with his end, but pretty bad on my end. So just now I've actually gone back finally, a couple of years later and re-recorded my end of the conversation. And I tried to make it as natural sounding as possible, just a few questions really. So it was easy to do. So that episode has now been enhanced if anybody wants to go back and listen to that one again or for the first time. But the first clip I'll play here is Peter talking about Joseph Chiwetenwa and his wife, Marie Ionetta. And Joseph Chiwetenwa was the first lay catechist and parish administrator in North America. And he and his wife were Hurons, and Peter refers to them as the Huron power couple of evangelization.
And it was a very pious member of the Bear Clan, Chiwetenwa. At least that's how I understand best to pronounce his name. He hears this message during, I believe it was the Feast of Souls. It was an important feast. Brebeuf speaks, and he has a very powerful experience of the Holy Spirit. And this is told in a biography written by Bruce Henry called Friends of God, in which he tells the story of Chiwetenwa. Chiwetenwa is always listening for the voice of the Creator, wants to grow closer to the Creator, and now this has been fulfilled in a very powerful way, that the Creator has become man, and this changes Chiwetenwa's life. If we all had that kind of, and Chiwetenwa's story is incredible, but my point is that his life becomes absolutely transformed, not because it's a major break with his culture. And what's attractive is actually that it's really truly a fulfillment of many things that he sees in his culture. And there are other little extra things that he sees strengthen their culture, such as the sacrament of matrimony. So the bond between Chiwetenwa and his wife, Marie Ionetta, she later takes the name Marie. He takes the name Joseph, and then she later is baptized and takes the name Marie. And they become like the missionary disciple power couple that Pope Francis could only dream of, and which I think John Paul II understood that the church in North America had enormous, powerful saints for our times right here. And he says they have a heroic witness of faith. It was almost like he was asking the bishops of Canada, please bring these people, advance this cause, bring these people before the entire church so that we can see in a very powerful way what what lay people who really experience Jesus Christ and become overwhelmed with his love, what they do in evangelizing others and spreading the faith. I think that's what he was asking. He was Huron, and the neat thing that happened here was, a lot of us think that, spreading the gospel is done by priests and missionaries. They go into a place and they start talking about Jesus or whatever, and then all of a sudden, thousands of people converted. And I think that's told in a lot of maybe some hagiographies you're trying to look back on what 1,000 years of European experience was like. But Native American cultures are actually, the way that they're set up is a lot more similar to our own in America today than it actually was to European societies. I mean, for example, a lot of the European missionaries had this idea that, well, you got to go convert the leader, because that's what our ancestors did, right? The missionary goes up and says, well, all these people are listening to the king, so if I convert the king, I get all these people to come to Christ. Well, Huron society and Iroquois society and all these native societies are fairly democratic. They're built on consensus. They're not all democratic to the same degree, but they have chiefs and clan mothers, and there's a political division of responsibility between men and women. But there's no king, really. I mean, people will be influenced by certain important leaders, just as they are today in our own society, but there's no king to say, okay, well, now that I'm Catholic, all my subjects will now become Catholic. This is important because now the faith actually has to be spread by persuasion, by actually demonstrating it to people, by actually showing people. and inviting them into this relationship. And that's, I think, where knowing our own story here and knowing the story of Chiwetenwa and Joseph Chiwetenwa and his wife, Marie Aneta, is vital to how we're going to evangelize our own society today. Chiwetenwa hears John Dubrow speak, and he becomes impressed. He really believes that the Creator is giving a revelation through the black robes to them and to his nation, his people, and he becomes overwhelmed with wanting to see his nation and his people all brought into the fullness of this revelation. And so it's funny because he kind of keeps, from what we know through the Jesuit relations, he kind of keeps pressing them, to make him a Christian. And the Jesuits, this is all very new to them, really. And so they're a little bit more hesitant to do so. He gets very sick, nearly dies, and basically upbraids them and says, I could have died. You should baptize me. And so they say, well, okay, well, all right. But the neat thing is that his wife, Aneta, converts about 6 months later. And she takes, if I recall correctly, the name Marie. So he takes the name Joseph. So the father of the Holy Family, Jesus' foster father. And she takes the name Marie. So very much for Mary. So the model immediately that this couple takes is the Holy Family, which is also the patron of your show.
Right.
And they together are evangelizing. And the important thing here is that we know a lot of what Chiwetenwa said and did because for cultural reasons, it's easy for the Jesuits at the time, to say and tell what is going on with men because they're men. A little more difficult for them to interact directly with women. But this is a society in which women have a lot of authority and responsibility, particularly when it comes to selecting chiefs who will make certain decisions, and particularly over matters such as whether to go to war or whether to conclude peace. And this even goes to the arrangement of the household. So it was the woman's family that if the man married her, he left his family and cleaved to his wife. He lived with her and her extended family, and each longhouse was owned by the oldest, most senior woman, generally. So that particular clan mother. Joseph, in order to be successful in his mission, really truly needed the full cooperation of his wife Marie, and he definitely had it. So from the little that we know, she was a co-evangelist with him and very much dedicated to raising up a family of saints. It's one of the most eloquent things that we have from her is she approaches some relatives after Chiwetenwa's death, 3 years after his conversion, and they're weeping at his still weeping at his grave 2.5 years later. And she approaches them and she says, stop this. Let us together raise up a family of saints so that we may all be together with him. I'm trying to recall that from memory, but that's a beautiful example of what holiness is. And they were a normal married couple. This wasn't like one of those married couples we had, King Henry and Empress Adele or whatever, saying, well, now that we're married, let's all live as celibates. It's a little harder for people in the modern day to identify with, but Joseph and Marie had a normal marriage,
right?
And they loved their children like normal married people do, and they wanted them to become saints and to become holy, and they spread the gospel as a family, and I think they got their wish.
Here I asked Peter about Chiwetenwa's likely martyrdom.
And I do truly believe that it was a martyrdom, but who did it and why is going to be unknown to history. And it's probably because Chiwetenwa would want it that way. Chiwetenwa's and Ayaneta's evangelization received a lot of pushback. At a certain point, the resistance was becoming more intense. And the reason is largely due to the unfortunate impact of disease. The Europeans brought diseases with them, some of which were communicable through humans. But probably the most devastating diseases were likely contributed by other vectors, such as rats. And rats, as we know, wiped out European populations a few centuries earlier on massive scales,
Right.
Sometimes 60, sometimes 80, 90%. I mean, whole entire villages wiped out. The Europeans had already had that kind of experience. And we think that something similar had happened to native populations in the Americas. Chiwetenwa is basically struggling with saying, look, the gospel is something, is beautiful. It is completely in line with the tradition of our ancestors. And this will make us, this will bring us closer to our Creator, and be of overall benefit to us. So clearly, some people think that is absolutely wrong. There's concerns. Both Chiwetenwa and Aneta have concerns about the safety of themselves and their family. But Chiwetenwa has a series of mysterious dreams, and in native cultures, the dreams have very much a high level of significance, as they did for the Jews, as we read in the Hebrews, as we read in the Bible about God speaking in dreams. And one of the dreams that Chiwetenwa has is he sees very vividly his own death. He sees himself out in the field, in the bush, and about 3 or 4 Iroquois come upon him, and he fights with them, and they tack him to the ground, they scalp him, and they split his head open. And this happens over and over again. And people realize this is something is going on here. And the temptation is, if these are evil spirits that have designs on you, then what you should do is you should, I think, as Bruce Henry says in his biography, the thing to do would have been to make a sacrifice of dogs, or in order to appease the bad spirits and hopefully avert the particular evil. But for Chiwetenwa to do that would effectively mean renouncing the faith, and he won't do that. So people are telling him, just make the sacrifice, okay? And he refuses, and he deliberately says, no, the Creator is more powerful than any sort of evil spirits, and so I will trust my entire life to the Creator and accept whatever is coming my way. And eventually it does come to pass. Now, the Jesuits immediately thought that it must have been some Seneca, which is one of the 5 Iroquois nations of the Iroquois Confederacy, that were coming through. But they later started to wonder whether possibly it was some Huron who just wanted Chiwetenwa out of the way. They were done with this Christianity business. And who knows, maybe it was a murder for hire. We don't know, and it's probably important that we don't, because if it had been proven that it was conclusively the Iroquois, it would likely have started another war, because part of the culture was, well, I have to avenge this loss and maybe bring back some more captives who will be adopted into our nation to replace the loved ones we have lost. And Chiwetenwa would not have wanted that. And if it were members of his own nation, there might be either some division or retaliation, maybe on either side, who knows, but he wouldn't have wanted that either. I think one of the fascinating things is that the Jesuits had poured all this hope into Chiwetenwa. And I think it's St. Charles Lalemant that says, after God, we had all our hope in this man. And Saint Marie of the Incarnation, who's a contemporary, called him the apostle with the apostles. That's how vital that he was. The beautiful thing is that after Joseph's death, what ends up happening is that actually spurs a wave of conversions. And his, I believe that it's his brother, who becomes converted and then becomes a catechist and evangelizes very strongly. It produces a conversion in his brother and then a lot of other family members. And people who knew him said, wherever he has gone, I want to be there with him too. And so what keeps looking like disaster for the Jesuits in their story becomes one in which God tends to work miracles.
Here I had asked Peter about aspects of Native American culture that were not easily reconciled with Catholicism. In particular, the importance of revenge in northeastern Native tribes and the warrior culture in general. So I asked him, what would it mean for a Huron warrior to be a Christian? And this question led into the concrete example of the Huron warrior and Christian Eustace Ahasistari, who was a companion of St. Isaac Jogues. And there's a very interesting and strangely almost humorous story about what happened when Eustace and St. Isaac were tortured side by side by the Iroquois.
Here's where I would recommend that anybody who's seen the movie Black Robe get it out of their minds and possibly destroy that movie. Because they weren't pacifists. The Huron Confederacy, and again, I would have to look deeper, but there's a lot of evidence that the Jesuits were not really interested in turning their flock into pacifists that were just going to get wiped out. The reality, the big reality of the times, and this is where, again, the point about pre-contact being a little bit unknown, is that there are certain mechanisms of. So this society right now is characterized by something called the Mourning Wars.
This is MOU. Mourning,
yes,
right?
MOUR, mourning as in weeping. And ironically, the mechanism of having women have authority over whether the young men go to war or not is actually kind of a disincentive, supposed to be a disincentive to go to war, because women are generally those who suffer most from warfare, any kind, women and children. But the problem is that this mechanism gets completely thrown out of whack if the population is so vastly decreased that you need more men for the sake of your survival. You need more people for the sake of your survival. And part of it's also a culture that doesn't value dying in battle. A good heroic warrior should live to fight another day. You should stand your ground, prove your superior worth of your enemies, but dying is a bad idea.
Okay.
Yeah. Very, very different from some kind of European idea of I will bravely go and die in battle.
Right.
No, it distinguishes how warfare is done in the Americas. So the Huron Catholics, they don't become pacifists. So we have the example of there are these Huron warriors. One is called Eustace Ahasistari, but he's a companion with Isaac Jogues, and he's a fantastic Huron warrior. He's feared by the Mohawk. He makes a mistake in that he thought that a Mohawk party nearby was a lot smaller than it actually was. It's like 99 victories, and then just the one loss at the end is just the one that decides it. But anyway, he ends up being captured by them, and they want to haul him back alive because they want to make him pay for all the harm that he did their warriors. But this is a funny scene. So there's a funny scene. It's interesting, not really hilarious, but he's being tortured, and I think it was at a Cernanon. But he's being tortured, and he is not saying a word, because part of how you witness as part of the importance of their witness, because they're not just there as Hurons, but they're also there as Catholics. And the purpose of the torture is to make you scream and shout and beg for it to stop. But by resisting it and not saying a word, you show the greatness of your spirit, this sort of power. And this is very important because they've got to say nothing to show that this faith that they have has given them such great power that they can't, they will not break. They have the strength of the greatest of warriors, so to speak. And so Ahasistari, this probably would have been no problem for him anyway, but he's taking it. And Jogues, I say Isaac Jogues, that the Mohawks didn't quite know what to make of, is weeping. He's bawling his eyes out. He's making all these emotional prostrations. And the Mohawk are looking at this like, this guy acts worse than any of our women. This is not something that a man does. This is not something that a true brave warrior does. I mean, this guy is a coward. So, but the problem is again one of culture, because Jogues at this time, it was considered manly among the French to show great depths of emotion, to show how manly you were by showing how emotional you could be. So again, there's something that's being lost in translation, and this would happen with the missionaries in other ways. They say, "Well, I'm trying to communicate that," and there would be misunderstandings. Even Brebeuf wasn't immune to them. But anyway, Jogues is doing this, and effectively, Ahasastari has to stop, has to basically speak out and explain to his audience that no, this is just his culture. He's not weeping for himself or being a coward. He is trying to express, his admiration for me. As essentially, Ahasastari has to spin it in a way for the people that are torturing him because, Jogues, you're embarrassing me. And then the whole thing, then they amps up the whole thing by taunting them and reminding them how many warriors he's taken down. Because now Ahasastari has to basically brag about how mighty and great and powerful a warrior he's been. But part of the ritual, because this is a ritual, is you have to call vengeance upon your enemies who are torturing you. And Ahasastari refuses. And his final prayer is that there may be peace one day between the Huron and the Iroquois. That's something that I don't think somebody in the Vatican in the 17th century would have really understood very well. What's going on and why this is an example of sanctity. And I don't think we would have understood it very well in the mid-20th century when the Jesuit priests and their companions got elevated to sainthood for martyrdom. And unfortunately, the native examples got left behind.
Here's a clip from episode 4, which was my first of 2 interviews I've done with Carrie Gress. She's a wonderful guest always, and I'm sure I'll have her on again. This interview was about her book, The Marian Option. One of the really cool things about the book, especially the historical portion of it, which I would say is at least half of it, is the way that it ties a lot of these major Marian events of the past 500 years or so together.
Right.
And there's all sorts of different ways that the links between some of these Marian apparitions and Islam, the issue of Russia and things like that. So can you give us an example of how some of these things are tied together historically?
Yeah, well, I think that this is like just the fun part of writing and researching this book. I had a pretty tight schedule because we wanted to get it released in time for the 100-year anniversary of Fatima. So that, there was a tremendous amount of research that went into it as far as just, trying to cover all the bases. And I think a lot of times when you read books about Our Lady, they're very much devoted to like a specific devotion or a certain apparition or some very narrow quality or something related to her, topic related to her. And so that's what I wanted to do with this book, was make it very big picture and kind of see all these things that don't necessarily seem related. If you see them in isolation, suddenly they are related. And so that was just, for me, I would just, even going through it, I was astounded. I would go to bed and just think, how did I not hear this before? Why haven't I read this connection before? And I think one of my favorite connections was just learning about Our Lady of Guadalupe. And most people, when they hear that word, they just think of Mexico, and that's all they think of. And yet there is an Our Lady of Guadalupe in Spain that happened in the 14th century. It was actually an image that had been attributed to St. Luke. Now, whether or not it was actually painted by St. Luke, we're not sure, but it was given to an Archbishop of Seville. And when the Muslims came in, some very wise men had the prudence to package her up and put some information in it, explaining who she was, and bury it. And no one knew where it was until in the 13th century, well after the Reconquista had started, and this area had been freed from the Moors. A farmer had this apparition of the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And she said, "My image is buried here. Can you please tell a priest and have it dug up?" And sure enough, they found this, sealed box and pulled it out. And this ended up really being kind of a touchstone for a lot of the Reconquista. And Our Lady of Guadalupe was very much at the heart of Christopher Columbus as he's going west. And actually, even the same year that Columbus sailed, was the last year when the Moors were in Spain and they were finally thrown out. And Ferdinand and Isabella went to Our Lady of Guadalupe to thank her. And it was then several months later that they commissioned Christopher Columbus to go to the New World. So this was
Our Lady of Guadalupe as she existed before the Juan Diego apparition.
Yes, this is Our Lady of Guadalupe in Spain. So they had a huge devotion to her already. So then, of course, after Christopher Columbus sails, and there's all kinds of amazing stories about his devotion to her, and storms would rise up, and at one point one storm just wasn't ending, and so he and the sailors all promised that they would go make a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Guadalupe after they got back safely, and of course that's what they did. They arrived back to Spain after, and to much acclaim, and of course they remembered their promise, and rather than enjoying the spoils of their adventure, they made their pilgrimage to Our Lady of Guadalupe first before doing anything else. This very much animated the Spanish soul. And so then you have Our Lady of Guadalupe happening in Mexico. It's just another layer. So I'm sure to the Spaniards, it was nothing new. And I guess that's what's so miraculous about it, is just that connection that they already had with it. But it was also something that was just in the image, spoke to the natives in a way that the Franciscan missionaries couldn't reach the native population at all. So that in that image, there's so much imagery that explained exactly who she was based on her hair was long, which said she was a virgin. She had a bow around her waist, which said she was pregnant. She had this flower on her belly, which said was a sign of divinity. All of these things the local people could read immediately into that image. So anyway, then, fast forward to the Battle of Lepanto, and you've got Philip II, who is kind of in charge of the Navy. He put his brother Don Juan as the admiral in charge of the whole fleet. They, of course, end up winning the Battle of Lepanto after praying the rosary. The Holy League does. And Don Juan takes one of the lanterns from one of the flagships, gives it to Philip II, and Philip II takes it back to Our Lady of Guadalupe in Spain. So there's all this intercontinental, crisscrossing going on between these different Our Ladies of Guadalupe and just all these geopolitical events that it's really amazing when you sort of map it out and see it all all together.
Here's a little segment of that episode where I talked about the importance that we ascribe to private revelation and some of the sort of spurious reasons for disregarding it. I think your book makes a really strong case for the influence, and this was the whole purpose of writing the book, the influence of Mary on history. And in these situations where hope seemed to be fading quickly, and many of the times it was a military conflict or something like that, but equally it could be applied to a situation that we're in today, which is not defined primarily by an external conflict, but a spiritual one and a cultural one. There's this tendency for Catholic intellectuals to look to the intellectual to save them. And this is something that I kind of see to a certain degree with what, I don't want to be harsh and describe it as a fad, but just things like the Benedict option that people sort of seize on and write endless articles about and debate about, when there's something that's so simple right in front of us that we've been asked to do. And I think intellectuals also have an issue with private revelation. They have a hang up about accepting things like Fatima as being as important as they are. So I understand there is a distinction between private revelation and public revelation, one being, something that's essential in the deposit of faith and the other isn't. But sometimes people who believe that Fatima is legitimate will say, well, I don't want to put too much weight on private revelation regarding, say, the specific requests that Mary made at Fatima, like praying the rosary every day for peace, making the first 5 Saturdays in reparation for offenses against the Immaculate Heart, and things like that. And to me, it's kind of hard to express it. It's kind of a nuanced topic, but I guess to me the issue is, if you're someone who looks into Fatima and decides that, you're not required to believe it by the church, even though it's been approved. If you look at it and based on the evidence, you are convinced that it's not real, Mary didn't make these requests, I understand that and respect that. But if you believe it's real and then sort of sideline it as private revelation, that's just sort of an incoherent position to take. But the thing is that, Christianity extends beyond what is explicitly contained in the deposit of faith. And it's such a historical religion. And it's like, if you're given a tool to use and you don't use it, to save the world, then there's no point in writing all these editorials and complaining, about the state of things and the state of the church. Episode 5 was a few different things. There was a short interview with the drummer of one of my favorite bands, the Dusk Whales, about their EP that had just come out at that time called Hospital Dreams. And there was also a segment where I reviewed a couple films, and I spent about 10 minutes talking about the Met Gala and the Heavenly Bodies exhibit at the Met, which happened, I guess, in 2018, and I'm sure many of you will remember that and the controversy surrounding it. And it was one of my first kind of lengthy monologues on the show. I've only done a few, I suppose. And I'm still quite happy with what I said and how I said it. So I'm going to play one of the tracks from the Dusk Whales EP, Hospital Dreams, the title track, which was also played in that episode. And then I'm going to play you my little monologue about the Met Gala, which I thought it was fairly entertaining.
Sitting stately in the Pentagon, waiting for my vitals to return. I am taking patience for a spin again, hoping to remain another hour. Oh well, I lost another batch of cells. Oh well, I fought another battle. I'm dripping slowly from a plastic bag, waiting to absorb another poison. I'm taking liquids to relieve myself, hoping to retain a second cycle. Oh well, I lost another night of sleep. Oh well, I found another needle. I am growing backwards in the mirror again, waiting to receive another symptom. I am pulling levers to reveal myself, hoping for a chance to get on TV. Oh well, I lost another patch of pain. Oh well, I lost another tangle. I am ringing slightly in my ears all day, hearing every scream and high-pitched whisper. I am wearing headphones to replace myself, hoping to erase another sister. Oh well, I lost another frequency. Oh well, I gained another vital. I am singing softly in the hospital, trying to remain a silent patient. I am humming whispers to my phone again, hoping to forget another sorrow. Oh well, I lost another melody. Oh well, I gained a new tomorrow. Oh well, I lost another memory.
I went to the Heavenly Bodies exhibit at the Met in New York, which many people will have heard of in connection with the somewhat scandalous Met Gala. You probably saw a picture of Rihanna dressed as the Pope or something like that, at least. So this exhibit basically consists of a set of papal garments, vestments, tiaras, mitres, things like that, lent by the Vatican, and then some pieces of modern fashion that were sort of inspired, if you could use that word, by Catholicism one way or another. Now, based on what I saw, I don't think the Vatican should have been involved in this at all, but the smartest thing they did was require that the real papal vestments be displayed in a separate setting from the modern pieces, because the modern section was just pretty much a disaster. Aesthetically, religiously, I would say deeply stupid at best. A couple of the modern pieces I did like, and I'll tell you about those in a minute. So, of course, there were a couple of pieces that were written about that were overtly blasphemous and offensive. I'm not going to bother to talk about those here because they've already been commented on sufficiently, I think. But one of the odd things about this show is that there were a lot of pieces that just looked sort of normal, like they were dresses that were obviously inspired by nuns' habits or things like that. And, you can debate whether you should be wearing a dress that looks like a habit if you're not a nun. But, just as artworks, they're not problematic in themselves. But anyway, the odd thing is that a lot of these pieces, some of which looked relatively innocuous, just to look at them, I wouldn't have known that they were intended to be subversive in some way if I hadn't read the plaques, which is interesting. So, for example, there was one of these dresses that was sort of inspired by the design of a habit. And the description on the plaque says, "This habit," in quotes, by Riccardo Tisci, consists of a long skirt that wraps over the head to shroud the entire body in a swathe of silk jersey. Its propriety, however, is both tenuous and temporary, as a flip of the wrist and a toss of the head brings the veil tumbling down in a gesture suggestive of striptease. It's like, okay, I wouldn't have been able to tell that from looking at the thing, but thanks for letting me know what your intentions were with that. And it's just weird because a lot of the pieces were like that. There were a lot of pieces that were just kind of, okay, it's a dress that sort of looks like a cassock or a nun's outfit. A lot of them were obviously intended to, with the cassock ones, were intended to sort of like flip gender roles or something sort of facile and dumb like that. But it was odd. And I would say, a good 30% of the pieces at least would fit this description, that they weren't overtly offensive looking. But if you read the plaque, it's like, oh, this is gross. Aside from the pieces that were actually offensive, I found the level of supposed engagement and inspiration from Catholic imagery to be quite superficial. I mean, a lot of it was just like, oh, a ton of them were just, okay, these outfits are inspired by clerical or religious garb. Okay, whoop-de-doo. And then some of the others were just, okay, we're going to take this dress and slap a picture of Mary on it, which is like, it's like the fashion equivalent of Christian rock, except that it's, in this case, it's often intended to be subversive and mess with the sacred. But I make the comparison to Christian rock insofar as a lot of it is really surface level. Like, okay, we're singing this song about Jesus, and it's very explicit and on the nose, but it doesn't run that deep. And that was the case with a lot of these things. It was touted that a lot of the designers had Catholic upbringing or some kind of relationship to Catholicism in their background, even if many of them were not practicing Catholics. But first of all, we need to stop pretending, or the art world, or let's say the Catholics who want to seem relevant to the art world, need to stop deluding themselves into thinking that there's something valuable intrinsically in engaging with Catholic imagery or ideas. It's how you engage and the depth of the engagement that matters. And this is equally true in the high art world as it is in, the criticisms that you would make of, the Christian film industry or Christian rock or whatever. Actually, some of the pieces that I liked included some of the Byzantine-inspired pieces, and the reason for that is in part because the most of the Western pieces were mimicking or mocking clerical or nun's garb in some way, whereas the Byzantine pieces took their inspiration more from iconography, and they didn't just sort of slap a sacred image on a dress. It was a lot more. There was a lot, more substantial engagement with the the Byzantine aesthetic. And so some of those pieces I thought worked pretty well. And I could imagine some rich lady in Constantinople 1,000 years ago wearing this dress. Another thing that struck me about this show, and this goes back to the plaques again, and this is also typical of the art world in general, where you have to read the plaque to get the point, then it's bad art. But so many of these people are so highly conceptual that you have to read the plaque to get what they were going for. And it's like, okay, you failed already. To go back to the theme of superficial engagement here, they would make the comparisons in the descriptions of these pieces, make comparisons between the fashion world and Catholicism that were just so shallow and like so tenuous that it made me laugh. Hold on, I'm gonna read this one to you. Okay, so this was a Byzantine-inspired cross pendant from the personal collection of Gabrielle Chanel, and that at the end of the plaque it says, "Just as pendant crosses were one of the most persistent forms of jewelry in Byzantium, serving as a marker of the wearer's faith, Chanel's versions were highly sought after by her clients, worn as a sign of loyalty to her particular brand of modernism." It's like, okay, dude, you're really stretching there, whoever wrote this. Yeah, you wear things to signify things. I guess that's a connection. It says, just as they wore these crosses in Byzantium to mark their faith, Chanel's versions were worn as a sign of loyalty to her particular brand of modernism. But it should be, as opposed to that, because it's the complete opposite. It's the two couldn't be more different. To wear a cross as a sign of loyalty to some dumb designer's brand of modernism versus as a sign of belief that Christ died to save you from your sins. There's another one that kind of made me laugh here. Such an expression of the highly specialized skills of the haute couture is a reminder that fashion, not unlike the Roman Catholic Church, is defined by a system governed by hierarchy. It's like, dude, what isn't defined by a system governed by hierarchy in human existence? It's just such a stupid comparison. It doesn't tell us anything. It's just a comparison so you can find something to compare to, but it doesn't enlighten us in any way. It doesn't really provoke any kind of thought. In terms of, and as far as some of the more provocative pieces in this, display, one justification I can see someone making for it would be, oh, it's thought-provoking at least. Well, no, not really. I saw my fellow attendees, I heard tittering from some of them, but I didn't hear any deep thoughts being expressed by, the sexy nun habit. And the engagement, as I'm saying, was very superficial. It was like on the level of a Halloween party, not on the level of great art. My favorite piece in the modern section, and I'll put a photo of this on the show notes page for today's episode, was a wedding dress. And part of the reason that I liked it, aside that I found it aesthetically pleasing, was that it wasn't one of these where you're just like engaging in a very explicit and superficial way with the Christian imagery. You can tell it is sort of inspired aesthetically by certain designs on vestments and things like that, but it's something that you could actually wear as a wedding dress, and it wouldn't be sort of like this silly dress that looks sort of like a nun's dress that, who's going to wear that? But this could actually be worn as a wedding dress, and it would not be at all out of place. It's quite beautiful. Oh, that was by Christian Lacroix. So yeah, again, I'll put a photo of that on the show notes page. By the way, so one of my roommates works at the Sheen Center, which is run by the Archdiocese of New York, and they had an event that was sort of a Q&A with the curator of the exhibit and Father James Martin, of course. And I didn't make it to this, but my roommate did, and he told me that they were asked in a general sort of way about some of the potentially offensive items in the exhibit, and that their response was something like, oh, well, we knew from the beginning that some people were going to be offended no matter what we did, so we decided not to sort of make an overt effort not to be offensive, or something like that. And it just struck me that, yeah, they're sort of lightly considering whether people might be offended, and, well, people are going to be offended no matter what, so let's just do what we're going to do anyway. But the question doesn't seem to enter their minds whether God might be offended by some of these things. And, when you've got a bondage mask covered in rosaries in your exhibit, and you're going to pretend that this is like some kind of deep and respectful engagement with the mysteries of the faith and the Catholic artistic tradition, you're just full of it. I will say, though, again, it was great that the Vatican had the real Vatican treasures displayed separately from the modern stuff. I was struck in particular by a chasuble of Pius XI that was made for him by the Franciscans, a Franciscan community, on the 700th anniversary of the Franciscans, and it was covered in scenes of various Franciscan saints and missionaries, and the detail was just incredible. It was stuff that, like, who's going to be standing this close to the Pope, gawking at every detail of this chasuble, and just the gratuitousness in it, maybe in a good way, and the extravagance of it was really striking, because it's one of those things. It's like, who's going to see it? Well, the Pope's going to see it, and God's going to see it, so that's good enough. The last clip I'll play for you in this compilation is from episode 9. Episodes 9 and 10 were a two-part interview that I did with CatholicCulture.org founder and my father, Jeff Muris, just kind of covering his whole varied career in the Catholic apostolate, from founding the journal Faith and Reason to founding Christendom College and teaching there and working there until the mid-'80s, and then starting Trinity Communications, which was originally a physical publishing company and then moved to a web-based apostolate, which it has been ever since. So my dad is not that forthcoming with stories about the past usually. I mean, he'll tell you if you ask him, but you have to ask him, and I often don't think to for whatever reason. So it took me interviewing him to get some of these stories about fairly important turning points in his life, one of which was the circumstances of basically burnout that led him both to leave Christendom College and start a new business, and to institute the family rosary nightly, which was a mainstay of my childhood. And because the daily rosary is such an important part of my life, and it never even occurred to me that there was a time when my family didn't say the rosary together every day, it was great for me to hear the story of how he realized something had to give for the sake of his responsibilities towards his family and the spiritual life of the family together, and the Holy Spirit essentially using that to get that family rosary started. So that'll be the last clip in this episode, and I'll just go straight to the outro from there. But thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy this last one.
I was doing those things, and then unfortunately the college had a financial crisis in 1983 or 82, I think, where the funds held by the Catholic Educational Corporation were very badly invested by the person in charge of that, and they were lost. Not all of them, but I think about 60% of them were lost. And we thought we wouldn't survive, so I volunteered to take over fundraising because, of course, I had the mailing list from the press, and I figured that was going to be our only hope, in addition to what personal contacts Warren could continue to cultivate, and he did have some people who actually had some money and were donating. So I had to stop teaching for my last 2 years and do fundraising full time, along with all the other things. And by the end... Was that annoying? I mean, did you not like doing that? Oh, no, it was horrible. It was a penance from first to last. Yeah. I've always hated fundraising. The board was talking about closing the college down. And I was the logical person because direct mail was a primary means of fundraising in the 1980s still. I mean, the internet hadn't taken over yet. So direct mail was another 10 years away. Direct mail was the outside of personal contacts. It was by far the bonanza area for fundraising. We had been selling a bunch of books and the journal since 1977, so maybe 6 years or something. We had I don't remember how big the list was, but we had thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, I'm not sure, sound Catholic people who bought Catholic things to read on that list. And clearly that was our only hope. So I just piped up in a board meeting one day and said, I'm going to have to do this, and I will do it. I'll do it for the next 2 years. I'll call every member of the Christendom Educational Corporation to make sure they understand the situation. For those I can't talk into leaving their investment intact until we can replenish the funds, we'll use what money we have to redeem their promissory notes, and we will fill that back up again, and the college will survive. I probably half the board didn't think that would be possible, but they were willing to give it a try. So I had to do that too, and I suppose that was probably too much for me. I mean, we got the job done, but I was, as we'll come to in a moment, I had tremendously overworked myself. And I was getting to the point in terms of how much I slept and how much work I was doing that my judgment was beginning to deteriorate. I was not as stable in the way I dealt with opposition as I had been before. It was clear, and I'm not saying that, I don't know how many people noticed that I was struggling in various ways, but my closer friends certainly did. But the point is that I could see that this was not good for me. I was doing something fundamentally wrong, and had been for a number of years in the way I approached apostolic work. And what was fundamentally wrong was my instance of what I call the third type of problem that will always be faced in all apostolic work, and that's the personal problem. You have to know your blind spots. You have to find some way, whether it's spiritual direction or what it is, to recognize your blind spots, to recognize where you fall short in your trust in God and your ability to be led to a certain degree within the framework of the church, be led by the Holy Spirit rather than just pushing ahead always with your own ideas that you are sure are right. And if you only work hard enough, you can make them work, which was my tendency. My tendency was to be sure I was right and be sure and know that I could do anything if I just ramped up to a higher gear and did it. And my philosophy at the time and although that did some good, let's face it, that did some good, and we got through that crisis. And I was replaced by 3 people when I left, and that was the right thing to do. I mean, everybody had seen, first of all, that I was unusual, and secondly, that the consequences were not all good. So it was when I started recognizing that I had to think very deeply about what I was going to do going forward and how to do it, because my vocation was to be a husband and father, and my work in the apostolate had far outstripped in time and energy my vocation. That was the easiest way to recognize the problem, recognizing it not so much in psychological terms, but in very Catholic terms. And I remember, I don't know if you'll remember this, but it was 1984 you were born in 1990. Well,
I wasn't alive.
So you were not alive yet so you wouldn't remember it. Christopher might. So when Christopher was about 10, or maybe when he was 9, and we were up at the place in Lake Champlain where we used to go occasionally in the summer, I started the family rosary. Remarkably, we weren't doing that. And we were praying as a family, but remarkably, we were not praying the rosary every day, which seems inconceivable to me now. But then I hadn't had a thoroughly Catholic upbringing, so I was still learning what it meant to be a Catholic as well. And my intellectual approach to it was not the sum total of what Catholicism is. So I started that, one of the best Catholic decisions I ever made in our family. And we've been doing that ever since. But that grew out of this sense of what I call needing to understand the personal problem for anybody in the apostolate. How is my discernment? What is standing between me and really being sensitive to what God wants day to day, rather than just what he wants? What is good? What I know is good in theory. What is good in this situation? And for that, you need a very strong prayer life and constant introspection, and usually outside advisors, to be sure.
The family rosary every night was just something I took for granted growing up, and I never even occurred to me to ask, when or why we started But yeah, so how did you get to the rosary in particular? How did you come to realize that was the thing to do?
Well, it was said on campus a lot, and I said it sometimes on campus. And I'm sure I knew of Father Peyton and the family that prays together stays together, which was a slogan that was built primarily around the rosary. I'm sure I knew that. But this is all in the context of me thinking that what I was supposed to do was knock myself out from 8 o'clock in the morning until 6 o'clock at night in apostolic work, come home sometimes on time for dinner, spend time with my kids in the evening, and also on weekends when something wasn't super pressing that I had to attend to. And then after the kids were in bed, go back to work till 2 or 3 in the morning. So, people who are doing that don't necessarily think that it's time to institute the family rosary because they're so preoccupied with a faulty view of themselves and of the apostolate. I mean, I literally thought of myself as kind of a Catholic machine. I didn't deliberately try to neglect my family. I more neglected sleep, which was another part of the problem. Yeah, I thought I just needed to change gears and work harder and, the brute force approach, and we could get this done. But I had to realize that this was not, eventually I realized this wasn't healthy. Although it lasted, a lot of the problems were solved when I changed jobs, but it lasted a while, even in my Trinity years, because that, again, was starting a new enterprise. And of course, that's never easy.
Just because we're mostly talking about your work in this interview, but I just want to talk a little bit more about the rosary. I mean, how important did that become as a family thing? I mean, I know it was very important, but what results have you seen from that over the years, and where do you put that in the grand scheme of our Catholic life as a family?
Through faith, I believe that Mary's intercession is extraordinarily powerful, and that commitment to the rosary says something about your willingness to take time and get into something that on the surface seems boring, and to do it only for positive spiritual motives. So I think that's transformative. Both things are transformative. And the habit of prayer, no matter what prayer it is, if it's extended a little bit, is also transformative. I certainly would expect, and of course, from that time forward, we were praying much more with the family and much more for the family. I always prayed for my children and my wife, and she also. But the family rosary has a way of focusing you on the family and the family's needs. It also can be very entertaining when the kids are little, and somewhat frustrating when they're in that intermediate age where they really want to secretly read a comic book or something. But yeah, I think it probably was critical. I shudder to think how close I perhaps came to disrupting Catholic family life sufficiently so that there could have been some major breakdowns, but by the grace of God and by a modicum of good sense that it didn't get that far, I think is probably critical. And I mean, there are different things that you could do, but it's one of the best ways, perhaps the best way outside of Mass.